Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today we have a special guest, Mickie Kennedy from eReleases, a firm that specializes in writing press releases and syndicating them across the most popular PR newswire, which is, of course, PR Newswire. Mickie, thank you again for joining us. Looking forward to talking about press releases today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, this is a topic that I've been in digital for a very long time, and it's a strategy that we've heard a lot about over the years, and it's evolved in how Google ranks it and all of those factors that go into like how much strength it has. But give us a rundown of what eReleases does and why it's important to a digital strategy.
Right. So eReleases, our biggest differentiator is that all of our releases go out nationally over PR Newswire. PR Newswire is the oldest and largest newswire of press releases. In the US, there's basically two newswires. That's a duopoly, Business Wire and PR Newswire. There are a lot of people still in the space with wire in their name, but they either don't have the market share or they're not a true newswire. And what that means has evolved over time. It used to be like broadcast feeds that went directly into newsrooms. Now most of these feeds are delivered through the internet, and a journalist just has a login. But that login allows them to look at an industry feed as well as personalize the feed, so they can create inclusions or exclusions. So they're just seeing the relevant headlines that they would be interested in. And, because, the market share is largely two companies, journalists generally only go to those two companies. If 98% of the press releases are there, then, it's not worth them going to other places and services. And I think that's why it's made it very difficult for other players to get really large in that space. PR Newswire charges about $1,600 for a press release. We don't charge anything near that. When PR Newswire approached me over 10 years ago, I pointed out that at the time my customers were paying $250, I think, to move a release that we were just doing through email. And it just didn't make sense that, my client base wasn't going to be able to afford over $1,000. So we worked, tried to make it a win-win situation. Our releases by default go out next business day, and because of that, they can set it up in their overnight editorial team, which isn't very busy. They have to be there in case there's breaking news or someone in the US has to get something to the Asian markets. But generally, they don't have a lot of work to do. So it allows them to work on our releases overnight and set them up without costing them additional labor. So those were the kinds of wins that we were looking for working together. We also occasionally have large companies come to us or publicly traded companies that aren't a fit for working directly with, and we pass those leads directly onto the wire. But that's the biggest differentiator in what we do, and also talking about the value of a newswire. It largely is leverage. PR firms will use a wire, but they also use their Rolodex, and they will rely on personal connections they have with journalists and do personal pitches. But it's hard to scale that. And if you have something that's important and strategic and you just hit send, it is possible to get picked up in a massive amount of places with minimal amount of work. Our lead case study, the company got over 100 places. We stopped counting at that point because there was just so many small newspapers across the US that picked them up. But they also got picked up like in the Wall Street Journal and I think Washington Post and a lot of major publications as well. And it really is, just from hitting send once and going on the wire with something that really is meaningful and strategic and really resonated with a lot of people on the day that it was distributed.
How do we know what are some good opportunities for press releases? I actually read something you wrote about how sending out the new hire press release is a terrible thing to do. How do I know, if I look at my business, how do I pick out the things that are press release worthy?
Right. So I would say like 95% of new hire press releases are not important enough to go out. The exceptions are you have someone who's recognized in the industry that people pay attention to. Could be an industry veteran, could be, just a really heavy hitter in the market. People want to know when they're, moving companies or joining a board. So that makes complete sense to send out a release. Same thing if it's an executive with the company. If it's someone who's extremely important, high executive, yeah, that makes sense to go out. But I see releases for like an associate HR person or really low level, salespeople and things like that. And it really is unlikely to get any pickup outside of maybe your local paper and maybe one trade publication. And often they're little on the move sections where it's just a picture and a sentence or two. You'd be better off, I think, reaching out to your local paper and maybe a trade publication or two and just sending them, a photo of the new hire and a couple sentences about them if it isn't one of those major people that I talked about who's really important to the company.
When should somebody consider sending out a press release in general? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, people logically think of it when they have something that's important to them. And oftentimes that is the best time to send something out. You have a new product that you've released. Maybe you've partnered with a company. You're going to be speaking at a conference that's a really important conference for your industry. All of those are great opportunities for speaking to the media. A refresh of a product. An award that you may have won. But I think that the disconnect is people say, here's our new product. We want to sell a lot. And so they draft the release as we have a new product. Here's a few paragraphs on features, and here's a link to learn more and buy. And while, that may work if you put that in front of, leads who are actively buying that, it doesn't work to do the job that a journalist has to do with their audience. And the journalist's job for their audience is to either, educate or entertain their audience. And we love it when you can, educate and delight. But what could you do to make that announcement more educational? And I think one of the easiest things that someone can do at a product launch press release is, inject it with a use case study. Here's a client who beta tested it. This was their challenges going into it. This was the outcome. Love it when there's numbers, like a 17% increase in conversions or a 27% reduction in, logistics expenses or things along those lines, something concrete. And it's also nice to have a quote from that client. And what that satisfies for a journalist is it gives more of the elements or building blocks of a story. And I think that's one of the important things that people have to realize is that journalists are storytellers. And it may not seem like it, but, if you go back to when we would sit around fires, we all told stories in the same sort of way. And, there's a climax and then, everything that sort of goes around that. And by adding elements to any of your press release that helps to build out what could be a story arc really increases the chances that a journalist skimming that release will look at it and say, hey, this maybe in newsworthiness scale isn't major, but I can tell that I can build a compelling story here that my audience would want to hear. And all of that, goes a long ways into increasing the odds that a journalist would write about you. Other things that I see that would definitely help are adding photos. A lot of stories are put online these days. And a journalist who is comparing maybe two story ideas or press releases of similar importance will probably pick up the one that has a couple of photos that they feel their online audience will engage with. The biggest move I've seen in these types of images that work well is less of the clip art professional shots, like the product on blue velvet that's well lit, and more of like someone using your product in the field, an actual customer using the product at a company, or something along those lines, tend to be what people like. And the more candid, the better, because I think that that's what people naturally gravitate to online. So, those are all opportunities to give you a little bit of a boost and more likely that you'll get picked up. But other things that I think can really help a press release that's not quite there is, are there opportunities for putting numbers and data in your release? It doesn't have to be your data. It can be publicly available data. But, if you've got say a logistics solution that you've developed, maybe addressing the fact that, 67% of companies that fell in your industry in the first 5 years is because of the fact that they haven't solved the pricing issues around logistics. And that sort of puts what the stakes are for not having a product like yours. And they know that that will definitely make their audience pay a bit more attention, those
That's definitely
in that
a better
industry.
story. I mean,
Right.
a lot of people don't really understand what a story arc is, and it really isn't shaped like an arc necessarily. A lot of, you've got to have the good parts, and it's like, oh my God, it's about to fail, and then it's got to be saved or some other way. But that's what makes the best stories, because if you wake up and things are great, and then things get better, and then things are still great, that's not a great story.
Right.
It's not very memorable, right?
Right. That's why having a use case study where you take a company that, has a major issue and showing their journey of being unprofitable to profitable by using your product really is a good story that a lot of journalists are going to gravitate to and feel like it does a better job of conveying the importance of your product and solution.
And so when a journalist, and a couple things you've mentioned is just sort of like you have to connect with what the journalist's job is, right? If you can make the journalist's job easier by making your press release more interesting, give them the tools that they need to write their story more easily, like with photos and things like that, like you're more likely to pick up. When a journalist is combing through PR Newswire or the other wire, what do they actually see? Is it like reading an email? Like, are they looking at subject lines or headlines? Like, what do they actually see? Like, what are some...
So they're looking at the headlines, and then they're drilling down. And, one of the biggest, mistakes I see that clients do is they write their headlines like they would like maybe email subjects. And a lot of them are clever or they're full of puns, but they lack the context of what the actual announcement is. If the New York Post, for example, loves to have puns in their headline, and that works for consumers because they've got a newspaper in front of them, and so they're going to read on. But for a busy journalist trying to determine if this press release is relevant to them, having a headline that has no context, doesn't make their job
give
easy.
Us a great headline.
The best headlines are probably the blandest. They're the ones that just show the stakes of what's being announced, and it's like new author releases book. And addresses why that book should exist. A new author, releases book that, is a definitive guide to working less and making more using the Pareto principle. And, what isn't in there is the name of the book. It's probably not that important, but that this book is a definitive guide to working less and making more is really relevant and really goes there. And then you've got the Pareto principle at the end that some people will know and some people won't, but maybe it piques their interest. But it really just speaks to what is going to follow, what the announcement is. And I think that those are the best types of headlines. They're not necessarily the sexiest ones. No one's going to win a literary award for that kind of writing, but it does have all the context that's necessary for someone who's in that space and looking for books in sales and marketing to say, hey, this might be of interest. And then they would click on it and drill down and look at the press release. And a lot of people then will read the introductory paragraph and either move on and continue to read or hit the back button. And so you really want to make sure that your opening paragraph it really, explains clearly what it is you're announcing. In journalism, we tend to use the inverted pyramid, where we're getting the most important information at the beginning, and you never want to bury your lead when you're trying to give information to a busy journalist. And what that lead is, what the most important thing should be there, ideally in the headline and in that opening sentence, and if not, at least in that opening paragraph, in a way that makes sense and leads up to it and keeps you reading.
Gotcha. What should someone expect next? So let's say they put a great press release out there and it gets quote unquote picked up. What should they expect to happen next?
Right. So I would say 90% of media pickup is without contact. And when they don't contact you and just write an article about you, it means you did a good job. All the necessary elements for them to write the article were in the press release, or they were able to go to your website and get that additional information, or maybe you linked to a product page. So when they don't contact you, it means you did everything right. You didn't leave holes in there where journalists had to call and follow up by phone or email and play this game of back and forth in order to better understand what you're announcing. That being said, even when you do a great job, there are opportunities for a journalist to go down a different path. Like maybe someone covers, retail security, and you've issued a product that is maybe in warehousing, and they're wondering, I wonder if that could be used in a retail environment. So naturally, they might want to reach out to you and get clarification and see if it is something that in the space that they write about would be relevant. And so, not all the times that they contact you means that you've done a terrible job, but it really is a good sign that you've written a good press release when they don't contact you. The type of things to expect when a journalist does contact you is clarification. Sometimes they might go down a rabbit hole to see, in this case, if they're in a slightly tangential market or industry, could this be applicable to that? It's often a market that they're really comfortable writing about, and therefore they were wanting to see if this could be a story opportunity in that space for them. And, they never contact you and just say, good job, here's a link to your article. We really wish they do that, because it makes it easier for you to know when you've got picked up, but they don't do that. If you're working at a PR firm, you're probably going to use a service that will determine if you got media pickup. But those tracking services are so expensive that I never recommend them to my clients, because you're paying, $350 to $600 to move a press release. It doesn't make sense to spend $1,500 to $2,500 a month for 3 or 4 months to see if you might get picked up in a monthly trade publication that, if they picked you up today, probably wouldn't be published for 2 or 3 or 4 months. That is another thing to keep in mind. When it's monthly publications that pick you up, the lead time can be a few months. Newspapers can be a lot faster from, that day appearing online and then in print the next day to, it really just, over the next week or two is average. I would say 80% of media pickup happens within the next week to 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I know a couple tricks too, like to monitor to see whether or not you're getting picked up for free. Like, one thing you can do is you can Google the name of your product or your company, or set up a Google alert for those things. And so typically publications will have a digital companion, even if it's a physical type of a publication. And so you might be able to see if you're, showing up in some places, or even monitoring your Google Analytics traffic. You can see the refers. And so if you go in and you look and you see, like, hey, we've got some new refers and it's coming from the New York Post, or it's coming from a local news outlet, you're getting some new traffic. then you can see that, hey, there's some new articles out there that are pointing back to your site.
Right. And a good little trick is I tell people to always check Google News and Google Web. Some people have opted out of Google News and they still show up in Google Web, especially trade publications. So I recommend that they check both places. The ideas that you mentioned, if it's about a product or a company name that's unique, that's a great place. But the really cool thing is there's an advanced feature that's usually a drop down in both those places where you can actually define the days the range that you want to search. So pick the day that you distributed the release to now. And that gives you, you know that if it appeared before that, the press release had nothing to do with it, and that allows you to sort of look in a defined way, because sometimes other stuff will rise to the top in just a regular search, but that defining the range of dates is really great tool for people to do it. And I say, looking between Google Web and Google News probably picks up 90% of the stuff. Maybe it's 80%, but I think that it's a really good indicator. Your analytics, like you mentioned, is great. Just asking people when they sign up, how did you hear about us? And always having other available with the ability of them to write in a field is really good, because people will often tell you directly. But if you have other and you don't have the ability for them to write in, they're not going to. There's no ability for them to do that. And also sometimes just asking people when they call, hey, how did you hear about us is another good indicator potentially. But when you do get a great key publication like in a trade magazine or an industry trade website or a major publication, often you feel it, and you'll find out really quickly where that's coming from. But some of this ancillary stuff, it is a little bit of just searching and looking and getting a feel for that. What to expect afterwards. I've had everything from, people overwhelmed with sales to people, saying the sales volume didn't change very much, but we did get like a 20-30% bump in leads coming in. So it really depends on your industry. I find that that's more of the experience in the B2B marketplace. B2C and consumer driven stuff, especially if it's at a price point that's under $30 in your e-commerce platform, it usually is directly correlated into sales. You see the big bump in sales that often corresponds with a bump in traffic as well. But it can be all over the place as far as what people get and what kind of things happen. So because of that, I know that marketers hate elements of PR because it is really, a little bit of trial and error and, being open to opportunities. And I think that one of the best things that you can do when you do get earned media, and that's what we call it when you have an article written about you, a journalist is chosen to write about you, is to, take that earned media and share it with your leads, share it with your customer base, put it on your social media. And the reason for that is, generally when people get conversions from an article, they're usually higher than their best sales landing page that they send traffic to. And I think it's because, that article is like third-party corroboration. It's a big, sign of credibility. It's a signal of trust when a journalist writes about you. And I think for those reasons, when someone clicks through, they're more likely to do business with you rather than having their advertising blinders up. When I click through an ad, I'm very suspicious and I'm very ready to hit the back button. But if I read a great blog about a Kickstarter campaign, or an article about a Kickstarter campaign, I often get sort of, this emotional response, this like, wow, that's really cool. And I feel for the person. And I've read about, why they decided to do this. And I click through, and if the price point's low, I'm just like, dang it, I'm going to support them, whether that product comes or not, or whether if I spent some time on Amazon, I could find something that maybe is like 60-70% of the way there at a lower price, but that's what happens with earned media. And that same thing can happen with your customer base and your leads. First thing people say is, well, if they're your customers, why bother? And what I find is the people who do PR and get earned media and share it with their customers, their churn rate goes down. And I think what happens is a person who probably every 2, 3, 4 years says we should try someone else just to make sure we're using the best company, or we should consider other people. They don't go into that shopping mode when they see these signals that you're a great company. You have this clout and currency from a journalist writing about you. They feel very comfortable and they're less likely to shop around, which reduces your churn. And in the cases of leads, the idea is that, there's always a certain percentage of your leads that you're not going to convert. And, in some markets, it's, really high, like 90% of your leads will not convert. But maybe you get, some of those that were on the fence. Maybe they were at 47%, 48%. You need to get them over 50% to convert. Maybe this earned media article, getting that in front of them, whether it's a newsletter, a link, social media, or whatever, they read it and they get that same excitement, that same signal of trust is radiated, and hey, it gets them to 53%, and they decide to work with you. So those are all really great things that can happen with earned media. I had a carpet company in New Jersey, which I can't think of a more non-newsworthy company, and we were able to identify a blind spot or gap in their industry. And it made it very easy for us to write press releases that resulted in articles in floor trade publications. Now, the biggest problem I saw with that is their customers don't read those. But they were very happy with it. And they said, just keep doing that. And those are actually the publications we want. And at the end of a campaign with them, they had about 30 clips. I'd say their local newspaper picked it up in New Jersey Magazine. They were based in New Jersey. And outside of that, everything else was floor trade publications. But they put it in what they call a brag book. It's a big binder that their sales guy takes out when they give a quote. And just by adding that and just opening it and say, hey, we may not come in as the cheapest, but we've been in business for X amount of years. And we're really passionate about doing a really great job in the beginning. So we don't have to come back and restretch the carpet or, fix seams, all of these things that people weren't necessarily thinking of. And then they just show them, here we are in Floor Trade Weekly, here we are in this publication, here we are in New Jersey Magazine, and just thumbing through and adding that 1 minute or less to the sales conversation resulted in a 17% increase in conversions from giving these quotes inside a person's home.
One of the topics, that's really, really good information. And I can see how we can use some of that to be more accurate. And even if you're in an industry where you might not think that, you have press-worthy stuff going on, one of the things that's top of mind for us is AI, right? These generative AI tools, they're very good at writing compared to most people. Now, you being a professional writer, they haven't gotten to your level yet, but there's a good chance that they will get better, even better than they already are at writing. How are you seeing these tools be used in your industry, or how do you feel like it's going to affect your industry in the future?
I spent this weekend writing press releases with the ChatGPT 4.0, and it has come a long way. I was able to get 3.5 and 4 to write pretty decent releases, but it wasn't me setting them loose and just saying, here's a block of information, write a press release on it. I had to direct it to, hey, let's structure a press release on this subject. We're doing this announcement. How would you structure this in, say, 6 to 8 paragraphs? And then sort of approach it paragraph by paragraph to try to get the copy just right. And I found that in this case, I've been able to set it loose and say, write a 600-word press release on this announcement Here's information about the company. Here's their website. I copy and pasted the about section of their website, and it pulled together a really good press release. So I think for people who are having challenges writing, I think it can do a really good job. What I haven't found it do a good job of is what should press release be about? Yeah, you sort of have to come to it with that or brainstorm with it. But I even find then it's pretty generic. It doesn't really drill down in a lot of cases to what I feel are the great layers of information that I tend to think have a better success rate. For example, if there's something trending in your industry, 15 years ago, people called that newsjacking, where you just entered the conversation that everybody in the industry is talking about and just add your little quote and you get an article or two written about it. So many people do it now, it's completely ineffective. But if there's something that's trending in your industry and you can take that and really, pivot it to another niche or really add a layer of complexity to it, you could stand a really good chance of pickup. And, I had a client come to me when the Target credit card breach happened years ago, and they wanted to newsjack that and just join the conversation. And at that point, I had already found 140 articles that mentioned it, the Target credit card breach, and they were in the security field. They were consultants. And so I'm just like, who's your sweet spot for customers? And like, we work with everybody. I'm like, yeah, but who do you like? And he goes, well, we make our most money with just mom and pop places like, dry cleaners and, solo restaurants and pizza shops and things like that. And I was like, well, there is, I think, a gap of people talking about this credit card breach because they're all writing articles and the consultants are all seeking these large B2B customers or B2C customers that are many locations like franchises and things like that. And I said, you should write a press release where it's like, hey, if you're just a local business with this credit card terminal on your counter that you have no idea how it works, are you as susceptible to this credit card breach as everyone else? And surprisingly, that was something that a lot of just individual business owners were interested in. And he did get a little pickup as a result of that. And I don't think anything would have happened if he had just gone the other way. So I think sometimes, trying to define a different path or layer of complexity is really good. And I don't know that necessarily AI is great at that yet, or even brainstorming into those types of scenarios yet. But I do think that if you do that work and then go to AI for the actual copy and putting it together and organizing it, I think AI is almost there. And I definitely think that with a little coaching, like one of the things I did this weekend was say, I'm not happy with this first paragraph. I don't like the fact that the company is not mentioned till the very end of the first sentence. Give me another, 3 sentences to start this paragraph. And then I was like, okay, now give me 3 variations of this paragraph. And eventually I got what I wanted out of it, but I had to tweak it a little. Sometimes, you can just ask, do 10 variations of different headlines on this topic. And maybe, one will just stand out among all the rest. When I was done with this exercise, I did it for my editors because I wanted to show them, that for people who are reluctant, with a budget that can't afford us to write the release, how to sort of coach them to maybe do it themselves with AI. And I do think I'm going to put together some videos myself for my clients on that. It is, how to sort of finesse it in a way to get something that's good out of it. I think that the quotes that the AI provides are very safe quotes. And I think that one of the biggest things that you can do to have a meaningful press release and stand a better chance of getting picked up is have a quote that just nails it and is an amazing quote. And when I say that, what do I mean? It could be like how colorful the language is. I have a poetry background, so it might be the flourish by which I wrote it. It just sounds beautiful, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be the way that I've condensed it and said something with such precision that if a journalist paraphrased it, there would be a loss. It'd be like, oh, what I said, I got across in one sentence, and he's had to put it in two or three sentences. Or it could just be something that you just said that's really powerful and has a sting to it. So, spend a little time on that quote because, even people who pitch journalists with just two or three sentences, if they put an amazing quote in there, journalists can just envision building a whole article around that amazing quote because they know that that quote will just basically allows everything else to exist around it and makes that story really compelling. And so I think that's an area that maybe you don't lean on AI and you put your creative hat on. But I do think AI is one of those things that people should be embracing in the press release arena because you're not writing the article. You're just writing a tool in the third person with quotes that you hope a journalist will turn into an article.
Yeah.
And so I think because we're removed from it, I don't see any of the problems or challenges of putting blog posts on your website. I personally would not want to use AI and put blog posts on my website because I just feel like Google's smart. People are smart. They know what AI is. And I don't know if Google's decided yet whether they're going to penalize people who are putting AI content on their website or not. And I just feel for me personally, I'd rather not do that. But a press release is perfect because that's not the end product. It's just a tool for a busy journalist. And if AI allows you to say something in a way that makes it easier for that journalist to consume what you're announcing and turn it into an article, I think that AI is a great tool, and I'm very pleased with how far it's come along.
Final question. How does somebody know that they need to, how would you best suggest that somebody get to the decision or make the decision about hiring a PR company like yourself or a more traditional PR company? Like, how do you know that you need to play in the big leagues?
Right. I think it comes down to budget or how frugal you are. I work with a lot of clients who've tried small PR firms and spent 20, 30, $40,000 and not much really happened. And when I look at what that PR firm did, I'm often shocked that they didn't do what I consider like home runs. In some cases, these clients got no earned media. And, I have one type of press release that when any of my clients do it, they always get earned media. It has never failed. And the least they've ever gotten that I've worked with them on is 4 articles of earned media. And that it's usually 8 to 14 articles from one press release. And so, I think it depends on if you have the budget and you can afford a PR firm that has a proven history, that's great. But if your budget's so small that you're considering someone who doesn't have a lot of their track records online and you're not quite sure, then I would maybe, try it yourself. And, eReleases as a distribution platform is very cost effective. As I mentioned, AI can help you write a release. And I have a free masterclass on how to brainstorm strategic types of releases you should focus on. And, that's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And I think that by doing it yourself and relying on this, you can sort of go through an entire PR campaign, which is 6 to 8 press releases over a period of time, for under $3,000 or $4,000 using eReleases. And it does take a little bit of a time commitment. But I also think that by you doing it yourself, you really sort of learn what works and what doesn't work, and allows you to challenge yourself to sort of recognize potential opportunities that may happen in your business. And so it really depends on your budget and where you are. A great PR firm is definitely worth what they charge, which is generally substantial, but the smaller ones are really hit and miss. And a good PR firm is going to be industry specific. And one of the biggest trends that I see among clients who've tried smaller PR firms and got no results is the PR firm that they chose did not have an industry specific. And as a PR firm, your value is your Rolodex.
Well, you mentioned the relationships with the journalists, and if you can
and I don't see how a PR firm can be have a relationship with all industries. It's a reason that the good PR firms pick an industry and they own that industry and they foster relationships within that industry. I don't think a small PR firm, especially, can do a good job as a generalist because I don't think they're going to have those relationships throughout all different industries.
That's an interesting perspective. I really appreciate your insights on it. Mickie, where can people follow you and keep up with your thought leadership?
Sure. So eReleases.com is the website. All of our social media is on the lower right. It goes to my direct LinkedIn, which is a good way to reach me personally. But feel free to call or email or chat online. You'll only talk to an editor. We have no salespeople. There's no commissions. We're pretty much straight shooters when it comes to letting you know whether we think something's going to work or not work. And we help people through their first PR campaigns, and we're really big into education. Like I said, that free masterclass goes through over 8 ideas of a brainstorm for strategic types of ideas for anybody. And again, that was at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN.
Well, Mickie, thank you again, and we'll be sure to follow you there. And you can follow us anywhere where podcasts are found, at thelawofrelevancy.com, and also across all the Bake More Pies social media feeds and website.